Hey YouTube, what's up? It's Pensive Fox and these are my thoughts. And today we're going to be talking about my favorite D&D class, or one of my favorites, and one that I've actually never gotten to play despite my love of it. And that is the Wild Magic Sorcerer. So the Wild Magic Sorcerer is a subclass of the class Sorcerer. The other path you can take that's outlined in the book is Draconic, and then of course on a bunch of websites and pages and in other expansions of the game there are other subclasses you can go into. But in the original player handbook for 5e there are only two subclasses, and that is Draconic Sorcerer and Wild Magic Sorcerer. The Draconic Sorcerer is not what we're talking about today though. We're going to be talking about the Wild Magic Sorcerer. And what's fun about the Wild Magic Sorcerer is all the possibility that comes with it. Unlike clerics and paladins and wizards and warlocks, wild magic sorcerers don't actually know where they get their magic from. Or they do know, but it's completely random and really unusual. Where wizards get their magic from studying, and warlocks get their magic from a patron, and clerics and paladins get their magic from gods, and draconic sorcerers get their magic from a draconic bloodline, wild magic sorcerers can have anything from a curse, a bane, a boon. It could be a magic item they picked up at one point and the magic rubbed off on them, one of my favorite things to play with. It could be accidentally falling through a portal into some chaotic realm or plane of existence. It could be anything. And it's so fun to play with that concept of your magic being from anywhere, or it being completely random and something that you shouldn't have but you do. The primary stats for a sorcerer are Constitution and Charisma. You're going to want them to have high charisma because that is their casting stat, and you're going to want them to have high constitution because they're primarily DPS along with some support. And because of that, they have no armor. So because they have no armor, you're going to want to give them a lot of health points, because chances are that once your tank goes down, DPS is coming next, and if you're the one casting all the damage, they're going to go after you. Something really unique to sorcerers is their metamagic, and it's one of the coolest things. And this goes for draconic sorcerers and wild magic sorcerers and whatever other type of sorcerer you're playing. All sorcerers get something called metamagic. And metamagic basically means that they can draw from a pool of like points. Sort of think of the monks' key points and how they have special abilities that they can do when they spend their key points. That is essentially what you can do with a sorcerer's metamagic. Think of it also like mixing the warlock's invocations with the monk's key points. So essentially you can choose at 3rd level 2 types of metamagic options. So similar to how a warlock gets to choose their invocations. But on top of that you get an amount of points, and think of those like the monk's key points. And when you want to, and when it's applicable, you can spend your points to enhance your magic. For example, I'm going to be using a character that I built but never actually got to play the way I wanted, and she was intended to be a wild magic sorcerer. You might be thinking, wait, I thought you never got to play a wild magic sorcerer. And you're right. I built this character, but then the DM decided that he did not like the Wild Magic Sorcerer class and he didn't want it in his campaign. And that's part of the reason why I'm making this video. Now, that was several years ago, but since my campaign is coming up and I've been looking into D&D a lot again, preparing all my NPCs and stuff, and since my friends and I recorded a podcast the other night talking about player agency in the stories and how DMs should never say no to their players and should instead work to compromise so that everyone is happy and that the story can continue, I really started thinking about this character again, and I really started to think about the class and the reasons why this DM had so many problems with the class. It's a complaint I've heard before, not by many people, mainly because I haven't asked a lot of people about it, but if you want to give me your opinions on the class, please leave comments down below and we can just really cultivate a discussion about the class and things we would change about it. That's part of what I'm going to be doing in this video, is discussing what I like about the class, and as a DM, if there is anything I would change, or really kind of criticizing it and looking at it from a skeptic's point of view and trying to see where other people have problems with the class. So we're going to be using this character I built but never actually got to play, and her name is Iris. She's a 19-year-old human, and she has really pretty gold hair, pale skin, amber colored eyes. She was basically a mail person. She would deliver stuff for people. And one day, someone wanted her to deliver a very special object. And she ended up getting chased because I guess a group of people found out she had the object. She got chased into the woods. It fell out of her bag. She picked it up with her bare hands, so on and so on. And that's how she gained her wild magic. Whatever was in this object or whatever this object possessed, it rubbed off on her, it got absorbed into her. Regardless, she touched this very magical object and she became magical. We were 3rd level, so she had her metamagics. The metamagics I chose for her were quickened spell and twinned spell. And at 3rd level you only get 2, so I'm just going to explain these 2 so you can kind of get an idea. The book has 7 different metamagics you can choose from once you reach 3rd level. And at 10th level you get more metamagic, and at 17th level you get more metamagic. But from 3rd level to 10th level you only have 2 metamagic options, which is enough. Trust me. Once you hear what these can do, your mind is going to be blown. Because this is one of the coolest features of the class. Not just the wild magic class, but all sorcerers in general. This is what they do. This is their main thing. We're going to start off with the first one I chose, which was quickened spell. So quickened spell allows you to spend 2 sorcery points and change the casting time of a spell that has 1 action to a bonus action. You could essentially cast 2 spells in the same round if you cast 1 as a bonus action and 1 as an action. It makes it crazy. Of course, you're still burning spell slots to do this, so you have to be careful because you don't want to keep doing this every turn and then run out of all your spell slots in like 2 rounds. But this would be really good if you're trying to just finish off the bad guy really quickly or deal with a bunch of adds. So one of the spells Iris had was Chromatic Orb, which is personally definitely one of my favorite low-level spells in the game. Because it is so versatile, you can change the element you're casting with, and because it's just a beautiful image to have this ball of just energy in your hand and just push it towards someone. I love it. In theory, if she was in a fight, she used her 1st level spell slot and used 2 sorcery points, she could change the casting time of Chromatic Orb to a bonus action, which in theory would allow her to cast Chromatic Orb twice in 1 turn. Once as a bonus action, once as an action. Or maybe the player doesn't want to spend 2 spells in 1 turn. Then you could use your action for something else. Say you cast it and then use your action to hide, or cast it and use your action to run because what the hell? This is a fight that you shouldn't have gotten into. There's a lot you can do that makes it extremely versatile and just unbelievably powerful for such a low level. Especially at 3rd level, being able to cast something as a bonus action is just really cool and really useful. So the second metamagic that I chose for Iris was called Twinned Spell. Twinned Spell allows you to take a spell that would originally target 1 person and make it target multiple people. The only stipulations to this are that it cannot have, the spell you're casting cannot have a range of self. So if it's something that you do on yourself, you can't use Twinned Spell to then make it cast on other people. So a good example of a spell you can't cast with Twinned Spell is Shield. Shield has a range of self, meaning you can only cast it centered on yourself. So you wouldn't be able to use Twinned Spell to cast it on multiple people, just you. The other stipulation with Twinned Spell is that you cannot use a spell that already has the option to target multiple targets. A good example of this is Magic Missile and Scorching Ray, because they have the option to target multiple people. But some spells you could use are Chromatic Orb and Ray of Frost. Those are 2 good examples of spells you can use with Twinned Spell because they're not centered on self, they are ranged, and they don't already target more than 1 person. So with Chromatic Orb, instead of targeting 1 person, you could target 2 people. So theoretically, at 3rd level, you have 3 sorcery points. So theoretically, if you wanted to use these abilities together, you could not only quicken Chromatic Orb, but also twin chromatic orb at the same time, all in one round. Now, granted, you'd be spending all of your sorcery points for 3rd level because you only have 3 points and it costs 2 to cast quickened spell and 1 to cast twin spell because chromatic orb is a 1st level spell, so you're spending 1 point to do that. So you are creating 2 chromatic orbs and they're a bonus action. That is how insane this can get if you mix and match the correct abilities and are careful with how you spend your metamagic points. Something I forgot as I was flipping through the book, something that's really important and something that is also very unique to sorcerers, is their 2nd level ability, Font of Magic. And again, we haven't even gotten into Wild Magic Sorcerer yet. All of this stuff is just for sorcerers as a whole. So that tells you something about this class. That's why I love sorcerers so much. The Font of Magic ability allows you to take your metamagic point, or as they call them, your sorcery points. So again, sort of like your monk key points, but hella more awesome. You take those points and you can transfer them into spell slots. So that's really crazy. You can do this for however many points you have and however many spell points you need. You can also convert your spell slots into sorcery points. And in the book, it has a chart detailing how many points each spell slot is. So let's say you're out of 1st level spell slots and you need more, you would take 2 sorcery points and convert them into a 1st level slot. A 2nd level slot would cost 3 and a 3rd level slot would cost 5, and so on. It details it out in the book. So those 2 abilities combined make the sorcerer already a very flexible class in which you can move your magic around where you want it and when you need it. This class also relies on a lot of resource management. So if you're not carefully managing your sorcery points, then you're going to end up in a bad spot because your sorcery points are how you move your magic around, and if you don't have any, then you're just a pretty basic caster. But with them, you're very powerful. So that's something to keep in mind if you're going to play a sorcerer, is that you need to manage your sorcery points well. And you regain all of your sorcery points that you spend after a long rest. So I've talked about the basic sorcerer stuff, the Font of Magic and the Metamagic, which is applied to all sorcerers. But now we're going to talk about my favorite subclass of sorcerer, which is the Wild Magic. And this just makes things psychotic. So I mentioned before that I love the Wild Magic Sorcerer because your magic can come from anywhere. And your character may not even know where their magic came from. It's just random and chaotic and crazy and lots of fun to play. When you choose this subclass at 1st level, you gain an ability called Wild Magic Surge. And what that means is that after you cast a 1st level spell or higher, so 1st level, 2nd level, 3rd level, anything but a cantrip, the DM can choose to have you roll a d20, separate from whatever thing you're casting. So you roll for what you're casting, and then you roll this other d20. If you roll a natural 1 on this d20, then you flip the page in your book to the Wild Magic Surge table, and you roll 2 dice, the percentile dice. So it's a percentile and a d10. Pretty much they're both d10s, but one has a 0 before each number. So it'll be 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3. And whatever you roll, you look at the table, and that's the effect that is created. So I don't know what everyone else thinks about that ability, but I know that the DM who told me I couldn't play the Iris character didn't like it because it created too much randomness and chaos in a campaign where he didn't want there to be any. And here's kind of what my response is to that. So the thing about this ability is that it only happens when the DM says so, which to me is pretty lame because then the DM could just choose to never have you roll. So to me, there needs to be some kind of system in place for you to be rolling on the table. So if I ever had a player playing a Wild Magic Sorcerer, and how honestly I would prefer to play a Wild Magic Sorcerer, then I would do it like this to ensure that the surge table gets used and the DM doesn't forget about it, because being a DM myself, I forget about my players' abilities all the time, especially when they get to higher levels and you're focused on 1,000 other things. Generally, I tell them, remember your abilities, I'm not going to remember them for you. And if you forget about them, I'm sorry, that's your own fault. Because then it puts responsibility on the players to study their class and remember what they can do and how they can use those things. And if there's ever a question about how those things can be used, then we look them up in the book, or we make a ruling. So how I would personally change that part of the Wild Magic Sorcerer is I wouldn't make it my responsibility to tell the player when to roll, but I would rather make it something that they either get to choose, so something that triggers their character, maybe like a very high level emotional response, maybe it's a word that's said, almost make it something completely random, but something that could still occur in everyday life. Like every time you see someone drop something, you have to roll on the Wild Magic Surge table. That way, it becomes even more random, and you're giving the player agency to decide when their character would be rolling on the Wild Magic Surge table, or if their character would be rolling to see if they get to roll on the Wild Magic Surge table. But something even more fun that I would prefer this class do is that every time they roll a natural 1 on a spell check. So generally, you're only going to be rolling for your spells if they are ranged attack spells. Everything else is pretty much going to be a save on the enemy's part. So that immediately reduces the chances of them having to roll. But then on top of that, even if they have to roll, like, okay, I'm going to use some math numbers here for a second, and please don't hate me, because I sort of hate me a little bit for using math. I hate math. A d20 has a 5% chance of rolling a 1. So every time you roll a d20 dice, you have a 5% chance of rolling a natural 1. So if you make the ruling where every time they roll for a spell, that if they get a natural 1, they then have to roll on the Wild Magic Surge table, it's only a 5% chance. But it's actually even less than that, because not every spell your players cast is going to require them to roll. A lot of times, it's just a save on the enemy's part, or it's just something that automatically occurs. In that case, it's less than 5%. And it would also only be for spells of first level or higher. So you're taking away all chances of cantrips causing them to wildly surge with magic. That is personally how I would do the Wild Magic Surge if I were running someone whose character was like that, or if I could choose that myself. That is how I would play that ability. But in the book, it is written that the DM gets to choose. So to all of you DMs out there, please don't forget about that ability if your player is playing a Wild Magic Sorcerer, because that's really important to this subclass, and it's really annoying when a DM forgets something like that. If you want to take the responsibility of that subclass off of yourself, then let the player decide when they should be rolling to see if they surge with magic, or take my advice and just have it be when they roll a natural 1 on a spell check. So the second ability you get from this subclass at level 1 is called the Tides of Chaos. It basically allows you to give yourself advantage on any attack roll, saving throw, or ability check once per long rest. But here's where this ability gets fun. So not only can you give yourself advantage on these checks, but once you use it, at any point in time, the DM, again, leaving it up to the DM to decide, gets to choose for you to roll a d20. And again, if you roll a 1 on that d20, then you roll percentile dice on the Wild Magic Surge table to see what effect occurs. And for this, I would also give the same criticism and advice. Don't leave it up to the DM, because the DM can easily forget, or they may not want you to, so they'll just subconsciously never tell you to roll. And if you're choosing this subclass, every aspect of the subclass should be embraced, including the Wild Magic Surge table, which I know a lot of people don't like, because yes, it can get overpowered. And in a minute, I'll give you a few examples of things you could accidentally cause. But I would also say that you should work with your player and not tell them they can't play this class just because you don't like it. That should never be a DM's response. Honestly, you should always compromise and work to make it happen and to make you feel a little bit better as someone who has looked at this class and loved it for years and done the math. It's a less than, if you do it my way, it's a less than 5% chance that anything is going to happen. And if you do it the book's way, it's about a 5% chance that something is going to happen. So it's still very small chance that anything is going to happen or that you're even going to get to roll on the Wild Magic Surge table. At 6th level in this subclass, you gain an ability called Bend Luck, and it allows you to use your reaction and spend 2 sorcery points to either add or subtract a d4 from a target's ability check, attack roll, or their saving throw. This is pretty cool because it kind of allows you to cast Guidance or Bane on one person once you see what they're doing. So if someone is attacking the tank and then they turn around and decide to attack the wizard and you see that they're attacking the wizard, you can say, nope, I'm going to use my reaction, spend 2 points to bend their luck and take away a d4 worth of their attack roll. So you just roll a d4 and then you subtract that from whatever the person rolled. So it only works like after the creature rolls, but before you know the effects. So you see that they're rolling for something, but you don't know the outcome of it yet. If the DM has already mentioned the outcome, then you can't use this ability. Again, the ability is pretty cool because it allows you to basically do this, spell level reaction to something, which can be quite useful. So a lot of people might say, okay, well that's a pretty high cost for something so insignificant. Why wouldn't you just take the spell Guidance or Bane and compared to other 6th level abilities and other classes? You're right. I mean, like druids and monks have magical attacks at 6th level, like with their bare hands. Druids have magical bare hands because their magical attacks only work when they're shifted. And clerics, oh my god, if you look at the 6th level abilities for the cleric subclasses, they are absolutely ridiculous. But for this one you might think, oh wow, that's not very powerful at all. A d4, really? At 6th level? That's not going to make much of a difference. And you're right, it's not really that significant. But the cool thing about this ability is it doesn't take a long rest or a short rest to recharge. You can do it as many times as you have sorcery points. And it's a reaction, which is even cooler. Could the ability be better? Maybe. Do you want to make it better? Go for it. Again, how I play D&D is a lot different than how other people play D&D because to me the rules are something you can bend and change depending on your group's needs and wants. So if you don't like this 6th level ability, then change it to match what you think it should be. But I believe that it's actually a pretty useful and cool ability, and it's, not as useful as having your fists as magic weapons, but for a sorcerer and for someone who could be playing support, that's a big deal. Casting Guidance as a reaction, and you only have to spend 2 of your sorcery points, and you can do it however many times you want as long as you have sorcery points. That's a pretty big deal. So at 14th level in this subclass, you get an ability called Controlled Chaos. And what this ability allows you to do is anytime you roll on the Magic Surge table, on the Wild Magic Surge table, you get to roll twice and choose whichever effect you want. Okay, and finally at 18th level in this subclass, there is an ability that you get called Spell Bombardment. And this ability basically, honestly, I was reading over it, and it's kind of lame to me, but I suppose at 18th level it's sort of important because at 18th level you're already dealing a lot of damage, and so dealing more damage is important. I don't know. So basically what this ability does is when you roll for damage on an attack you've hit on, so let's say you are casting Scorching Ray. You cast Scorching Ray and you hit, and you're rolling for your damage. You know what? No. We're going to use Chromatic Orb. So let's say you roll a spell attack for Chromatic Orb, and you hit. And then you have to roll your damage dice for Chromatic Orb. This ability says that on any of the damage dice you roll, if you roll the highest possible number, then roll another dice. So, for instance, on Chromatic Orb, let's say you cast a spell, you hit the target, and you roll 3d8, and you roll a 6, a 7, and an 8. Well, on one of those dice, you rolled the highest possible amount of damage you could have done, so you're going to take that dice and roll it again. Pretty simple. That's how that ability works. And then you add that damage to the original damage. So you got 6, 7, 8, and let's say the re-roll, you rolled a 4. So you did 25 points of whatever damage you chose to do for Chromatic Orb because that spell is just fucking awesome. That's how that works. Oh yeah, and that example was if you were casting Chromatic Orb at first level. Chromatic Orb can be cast at higher levels. That ability to me, it's kind of It's kind of, again, something I'm neutral on. The stuff I like the most in the Wild Magic Sorcerer is in the beginning, but again, it's something that I agree. I don't like that the DM chooses when someone rolls to see if they surge with Wild Magic. I like that it's something that is more organized and something more consistent, something that can be predicted almost, if you want to put it that way. Or something that can be put into a story moment. So I keep talking about the Wild Magic Surge table, and if you've never seen it, then you're in for a surprise. Because the Wild Magic Surge table is not just something that can benefit the players, it can also hinder them in some cases. And sometimes the effects are just completely random and dumb. And I can see why a lot of DMs have problems with the table. Again, it's a less than 5% chance that you will ever even get to roll on the table. But if your player, you know, whether you take my advice and use the system I have laid out for the Wild Magic Sorcerer, or you use the original book system and choose when your player rolls for the Wild Magic Surge, and they, against all odds, roll a 1, these are some of the things that could happen. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to read off the entire list because there's a lot, but I'm going to take my own percentile dice and roll a few times and just read you off some of the magical effects that I randomly roll for. I'm going to be using this one, which I got at a game store, which I'm going to show off to you guys like a beauty guru would her mascara. And we're going to roll. We're going to roll the dice. Ding, ding, ding. Okay, so I got a 68. On the Wild Magic Search table, because I don't have this memorized, you're going to see me looking down a lot. That's because I'm trying to read from the player handbook. If you roll a 68, a 67 to a 68 on the Wild Magic Search table, you are frightened by the nearest creature for until the end of your next turn. So that obviously is not something that's good for you. But again, that's just one of the negative effects that can happen. Let's see if we can get any positive effects with this next roll. That is a 98. And on the table, a 97 to a 98, you are surrounded by ethereal music for the next minute. So that is something that's obviously not good nor bad. I mean, it could be good if you're in like a charismatic situation, or bad, depending on if the people around you like music or not, I guess. But it's really something that's sort of neutral. It's not going to hurt you or harm you. It's just something that's happening. There is music playing around you, seemingly coming from nowhere. So I rolled a 12, and on the Wild Magic Surge table, if you roll anything from an 11 to 12, then it says you must roll a d10. So I'm going to roll my d10. I got a 5. And it says if you get an odd number, you shrink a number of inches equal to that number. And if you get an even number, you grow the amount of inches equal to that number. So since I got the number 5 and it's odd number, I'm going to shrink 5 inches. I shrank. I'm going to roll one more time just to show you guys some of the crazy stuff that could happen. 65. So this is one of the really powerful, crazy ones that could also get absolutely ridiculous if you're in combat. On a roll of 63 to 66, you choose 3 creatures within 30 feet of you that are going to take 4d10 lightning damage. Now, that's pretty insane, but it could also end up being a bad thing because you have to choose 3 creatures. So what happens if within 30 feet of you there are only allies? But also, it's really cool because, like, what if you're surrounded by enemies and you're running out of spells and you don't have anything high enough level to take all of them? this would fucking save you. So again, that was just a handful of things you can do when you roll on the Wild Magic Surge table. Again, the book's way of doing it, and personally my way of doing a Wild Magic Surge, less than a 5% chance that you're ever even going to roll on the table. But if you ever do get the chance to roll on the table, then those are a handful of things that could happen. From what I understand, a lot of DMs and players think that some of the stuff on the table can get really overpowered and really crazy. You could end up summoning things that end up hurting your party, and things that are really random and chaotic that could totally ruin a story moment. And as a storyteller and a DM, I sympathize with that. I understand. And my solution to this would, again, not be to say, no, you can't play the class and just ban that subclass for every player, but to work with the player. So if you don't like something on the table, change it to something that is manageable for you. Not something that's completely useless and meaningless, but something that you and the player can agree on. Customize your own Wild Magic Surge table. I am sure someone has done it before, and there are probably a ton of templates out there on the internet just floating around. It's not that hard. Just take something that you don't like in the table and replace it with something that you do like, or that is more manageable. I know some of the things on the Wild Magic Surge table give you back sorcery points, give you back spell slots, so maybe you could add more of those in there, because those are small things that help the player but aren't too powerful. You're just giving them back some abilities before they've long rested. And again, I'm going to really push for the, instead of it being up to the DM to decide when the player rolls, you setting something in stone that makes sense for when the player rolls. So whether it be something that triggers them, or it be they fail a spell attack. That's one of my favorite ways, because one, it mitigates it to, it limits the Wild Magic Surge to just spell attacks. So it's generally only going to be when you're in combat that something like this is going to happen. A high stress, high energy, very quick thinking situation where someone might get confused and just lose control of all their magic. That is super cool to me. So they make a spell attack, and let's say they roll a 1, they completely fail the roll, and then they have to roll on the Wild Magic Surge table. And I think that's interesting because it gives them that 5% chance to fail. It gives them that 5% chance to roll on the Wild Magic Surge table, but it also makes failures interesting. Because one of the things that I will criticize about D&D a lot of the times is failures aren't always interesting. Sometimes they're just really annoying, and as a player, it's stressful. You never want to fail in D&D, but when you do, it's especially annoying because you're like, but my character is good at that. Why did I roll a natural 1? I'm supposed to be really great at, making potions, or I'm supposed to be really great at climbing. I understand. And one of the things I love about this class, and specifically how I customize it, is if you roll a 1, it becomes interesting. It becomes, oh shit, what's going to happen? Because to me, if a caster rolls a 1, it's them not being able to control their magic, or them not having enough focus to hone their magic and hit their target. And in that case, what happens? Especially for a Wild Magic Sorcerer, someone who doesn't always know the origin of their magic, or someone who shouldn't have magic in the first place, it just happened, and they have no formal training or no real knowledge. Their stat is charisma. The only other casters with charisma stats are warlocks and bards are typically trained in colleges or know a little bit about it at least, and warlocks have their patrons, so they typically know what source their magic is coming from. Wild Magic Sorcerers have neither, and it's really interesting to see that them failing would mean them losing control of their magic in a way that other casters wouldn't. It makes them even more unique, and it takes away the whole DM deciding when you get to roll. We've talked about this for quite a few minutes now, and I think I've made my point. If you have any questions or comments about the class, please leave them down below. I want to know what you guys think, what abilities you like, what would you change about the class if you were to rewrite this class or run your own campaign, or as a player, what would you want to see change? What would you want out of this subclass? So this video is kind of just an anomaly. Like I said, I've been reading up on D&D a lot and just doing a lot of tabletop lately, talking about it a lot with my friends, mainly because we're working on a tabletop game of our own, but also because my D&D campaign is coming up soon and I've been preparing for it. You're going to be getting a lot of videos talking about tabletop and RPGs and stuff like that, but that's not to say that this is going to be a regular occurrence. With me breaking down classes, I just wanted to break down this specific subclass because it's one of my favorites, but I also know a lot of people have problems with it. So I wanted to take the time to explain why I love the class and things that I personally would change about it if I ever get the chance to play Wild Magic Sorcerer, if anyone ever allows me to play one, and also to criticize the class because I recognize it's not perfect and I recognize there are some changes that need to be made to the subclass. So I did want to give it that fair criticism. If you like the video, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. That means a lot to me. It means I did good and that I'm doing good. So please like the video and comment down below any questions or suggestions. I'm a fairly new YouTuber, so if you have any critiques for me, you can leave them down in the comments below. And subscribe to my channel for new content and more content. I will try to post regularly, but I cannot promise that. My life is pretty hectic right now. I'm very busy with a lot of projects, so I try to post once at least every 2 weeks. No day specifically, it just depends on when I get time to film and when I get time to edit. Anyway, I hope you all are doing great, and I'll see you in my next video.